Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about unbound identity theory, and specifically today we're going to talk about the how. Okay, and so how did Gary Gygax build unbound identity theory? In my humble opinion, here we go. He did it with three actions. Okay, he did it with the build action, he did it with the handoff, and he did it with specifically with the step back. And all of these were equally important, and all of these were, I don't want anybody to miss this. This was outrageously difficult for Gary Gygax, in my humble opinion. I think it cost him personally, and he had a challenging life. He had a life of a lot of broken relationships. Okay, his first wife, Dave Arneson, the Bloom brothers, Lorraine Williams, the list goes on and on and on. He had tons of bad relationships, right? That he broke generally. Like if you look at Gary Gygax's history, he broke relationships absolutely constantly. It was, and when you look at that long list, you're like, these aren't these people all going against him. He's building a world where he's distancing himself from people, right? So how did he do it? The first part was the build. In my humble opinion, this is how Gary Gygax built unbound identity. So the first part was the build, right? It started in like 1972. He published his Dungeons and Dragons in 1974, okay? And then from 1974 to 1986, he builds Dungeons and Dragons. He literally is quite personally invested, writes many of the Orange Spine Easley books, right? These traditional hardbacks with orange spines and a Jeff Easley cover. He writes modules. He writes absolutely tons of the creative content. Additionally, he serves as president of TSR and is intimately involved in the business. And at the same time, he goes to Hollywood and successfully creates Dungeons and Dragons 1980s Saturday morning cartoon. That's not a small thing. 1980s American Saturday morning cartoons are literally part of a load-bearing wall of American television. Huge big deal, right? Like, and he accomplishes all this in 12 years, right? The build, right? So he's like, okay, so essentially he has this desire to help. He has this desire to unlock humans from being stuck in their soul-born identity and saying you can have as many lives as you wish and as many lives as you can find a dungeon master to bring you through. Or if you are the dungeon master, you can have as many lives as your imagination can create, and you can get onto the table on a Saturday or Sunday or a weeknight, or whenever you have free time, right? And it's not and the money required is pennies, right? Like, compared to any other traditional art venue that would allow you to do even a fraction of these things, right? Being in theater or any other, and all these things that used to be very carefully preserved and kept away from the poor, right? And only reserved for the rich. But he's delivering, multiple identities, parallel lives for any human who is connected to Dungeons and Dragons at almost $0, right? Like, it's very close to $0. And it's transformative, right? And so he builds this thing from 1972 to 1986. That's the build, okay, of unbound identity, in my humble opinion. Let's talk about the handoff. This is critical. This is absolutely critical. I'm tempted to say this is the most important part, but I don't. But all the other two are so important. I can't devalue them. All right. So the build and the step away. All right. Let's talk about the handoff. In 1986, okay, Gary Gygax hand-picks Lorraine Williams to become president of TSR. Okay, and he chooses her, right? She is connected to the Buck Rogers wealth stack, right? And he knows he's picking a woman of power. And Gary in 1986 says, with his actions, I will put TSR on a track of progressiveness unmatched
anywhere within the tabletop role-playing game industry, and frankly, in 1986, unmatched almost anywhere else. And he says, I'm going, and at this point, he's broken his relationship. I think he's either broken his relationship with his wife, or it's getting close, right? He's broken his relationship with Dave Arneson. He's broken his relationship with Brian Bloom, right? And at this, and the Bloom brothers, right? Every Brian, Kevin, Melvin Bloom, right? One of his best friends, Don Kay, is dead, right? He sees that he cannot maintain relationships. Why is that? Very clear, in my humble opinion. He's lying, right? He's lying constantly, right? He's disguised this Unbound identity as a game, right? And every word that comes out of his mouth, he can't be fully open, right? And I think that's why so many of his relationships were so fundamentally broken, okay? Because people felt they couldn't trust him, and I don't think they were wrong. I think he was doing something. He was the only one who knew his secret, right? And I think this is a very strong explanation of why virtually every major relationship he had, people who had done incredible things for him and moved huge obstacles out of his way, and he has these horrible, who've done nothing but help him, right? And he has these incredibly broken relationships with him, right? Who had helped him when he needed the help most, right? Like when they were like, yeah, I'm stepping up, I'm going to believe in you, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to, I'm really going to take risk, I'm every step of the, I'm going to help you build this thing. And he just shatters every relationship with him, right? So then he takes Dungeons & Dragons and he says, I want this to go into a new, incredibly progressive direction. He says this with his actions, and he makes a female, a woman head of Dungeons & Dragons to carry it the rest of the way, right? And the reason why I think he does this is he knew, he's right, he's brilliant. Gary Gygax was brilliant. He knew if anything is going to last for centuries or a millennium or more than a millennium, it can't be as small as one person. It has to be massive and overarching, right? It cannot be strangled by the ego of one person. It cannot be risked by the failures of one person, right? It has to be carried forward by champions of progressiveness. Gary was a champion of progressiveness. He put black characters into the Saturday morning cartoon. He made sure that what he built was accessible across all American classes and all American wealth groups, right? He was incredibly progressive, right? And then he handed it over to someone who was far more progressive than him, Lorraine Williams. She becomes this, feminist icon, right, of victory in the 80s, when this was really unprecedented and very much unheard of, done in incredibly few companies, right? Especially an industry that's less than 2 decades old, right? The Handoff firmly cements as a foundation of the Unbound identity of Dungeons & Dragons as progressiveness, that this will always be connected to progressiveness. And you see that all over the game today, right? Strixhaven had orientation championing. Right now, we're waiting for Radiant, for Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, a book unprecedented anywhere in the tabletop industry in 50 years. 15 people of color only as the writers. I don't think it's been done in anywhere in the world, right? And it's all connected to the threads that Gary laid, saying this is all, like, D&D is the most progressive, and it had to be the most progressive if it's going to serve to take humanity to this better place where we're all loving each other, where we're all kind to one another. That's what he wanted. That's what he built, right? This thing where the limitations of class are gone, the limitations of wealth are gone, and people are allowed to be who they want to be and more, and experiment. And identity is simply a tool given to whoever wishes to pick up the books, right? It's incredible what he does, right? So he does the handoff, okay? In my humble opinion, that's the second key to the Unbound identity. Let's talk about the last part, the step away, right? He This is very important for you to understand, right? Check the source below. He was never fired from TSR, right? He had a desk, he had a job. He quit, right? And the reason why he quit was he knew that he himself had done everything that was needed to happen to make this human improvement engine surge forward, right? But it had to be attached to genuine organic progressiveness that Lorraine Williams would supply from 1986 till 1997, right? And he had to let this thing grow. He couldn't smother it with his own problems, right? And he had problems. His broken relationship, he knew that. He could see that he was breaking relationships left and right. So he stepped back, right? And this is the decision that huge creators have to make. Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, right? And Elon Musk. If it's just you, it will die with you, right? And unlike these other people who did some of that, but not as much as maybe they should have, he was like, I am going to let Dungeons and Dragons, I have kicked this thing off. It is bursting forward with the momentum I've given it, and I need to let humanity carry this forward if it's going to be genuine. I've done what I needed to do. My pride, my broken relationships, my toxicity, all of that only serve to stop what he knew when he had done the task he needed to do. And he simply stepped back, right? And he never created anything of significance again. But he smiled and he watched as his legacy grew and his legacy grows today. This legacy of doing something that had never been done before, giving people extra life, unbinding their soul-born identity as all they can ever be. And he knew what he had accomplished. He knew he had created his goal, and he knew when to step back and allow the white male energy he had given it to transform to a more progressive leader, Lorraine Williams, who would carry it forward with a female energy for 11 more years, right? And recraft Dungeons and Dragons in a completely new way, right? With an alternate charge, right? And when you look at it, this is, in my humble opinion, how Unbound identity was born. It was born with the build, it was born with the handoff, and it was born with the step back. And I thank you for your just like Darwin looked at, could see how animals had gotten to the point. It's beautiful. It's just a beautiful, beautiful picture when you understand it and you see it for what it is, right? That's my theory of how unborn identity stuck in America from Gary's work, from his build, from his handoff, from his step back. And it's a model today to create something that will last for centuries or millennia. And if you look at Dungeons & Dragons, that's exactly where it's going. It's going to, it's not hard to see that it'll be around for 300 years or 3,000 years because when he needed to be, he was brilliant. When he needed to be, he was sacrificial. When he needed to be, he was humble. And that's how you build something for centuries or millennia. And in my humble opinion, that's how Gary built Unbound identity. That's my opinion. Love to hear yours in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing. Have a wonderful millennium.